Hi, my name is Darien Arikoski Johnson. I'm an assistant professor at Georgia State University, and I reside in Atlanta, Georgia. My studio is at Atlanta Contemporary, the art center here in Atlanta, in the Studio Arts program. Today you're in my studio where I can talk a little bit about my work and the process involved with my work, and some of the things that I'm thinking about in relationship to the things that I'm currently making. Most recently, I've been hand building my pieces and allowing the physicalness of the resulting form to have more of an impact on the development of the composition that resides upon it. My process starts with me rolling out a slab of clay, and instead of cutting it and sort of dictating what I want that shape to be, that sort of shape that starts the creation of the form, I roll the slab and then fold the sides over and then roll and then fold. In that way, giving the material some voice. And then from there, I build and pinch and coil around that as a starting point. It's a very intuitive process that is led by ideas of the body. And then that becomes the impetus for the development of the form from that point forward. The three-dimensional form is set in place, and then I roll out more slabs that are sized in relationship to the more three-dimensional component of the form, and then suspended over it from above and attached and located, and so that the physical form has an impact over the way that those slabs exist in space. And then from there, the sculpture has an influence over the two-dimensional composition that resides on the surface. So the clay is this wonderful medium in that it can talk about both the way it exists as a form in space, so its ontological existence, as well as having a surface that is in relationship and fused to that form. We are both physical entities, but we also have a phenomenological existence, an existence that's in our brain's interpretation of the information with which it senses. It's a poetic use of marks that create a conversation about memory, create a conversation about a change in perceptual experience. How does interface affect our consciousness today? How do you make a gesture in digital space? What does it mean to have a physical relationship with a digital device? These are some of the bigger questions that I'm interested in. The square has symbolic meaning, the pattern of the square. So one, it points to the digital space. So it's the symbol used in Photoshop to point to the alpha state or to zero. So it means that there's no information on that particular layer. So it's another symbol for zero. And so that for me, it points to this language, this system of understanding, which is mathematics, and how when Fibonacci brought zero to mathematics, it fundamentally shifted that system of understanding, which then allowed mathematicians to develop new theories and work towards new ideas based on that fundamental shift. And so I think we're also experiencing, with the integration of interface in our society, a fundamental shift in visual language, and in a way, a shift in the way we understand things visually. And then the squares that are carved, and the discrepancy between the squares that are carved, and then they act as a transition when I paint these little shadows in to give it the illusion of depth, so that acts as the transition from the physicality of the form into the illusionistic two-dimensional information. That talks about being able to send tactile empathy into the future, so each square is carved by hand with a little loop tool versus being stamped. Like the way it would push in if it was stamped would be slightly different. And in knowing that, you can then empathize with the maker and sort of the meditative state that is evoked by engaging in a process like that. So a lot of what I'm thinking about, and some of the major questions in the work are about perceptual consciousness, but also how memory plays into our perception of things and how memory is malleable and manipulated through its own use. So the idea that a recollection can be recalled and then is stored again, but when it's restored, the memory has altered. So the Canthal wire is inserted here. So I was talking about the breaks of the plane and how information is moved from one point to another, both internally. So like you recall a memory and then you store a memory, that idea that the information is coming from storage to conscious thought and then back from conscious thought to storage. So it's like places of disruption, these plane breaks. So then there's also drip components. It's like drips to me is sort of this idea of that everything's sort of malleable. Like it emphasizes the malleability of the material, but also the malleability of perception and memory and thought. I take photographs usually of things that are fairly mundane or overlooked, and then I paint it onto these pieces of paper with watercolor and gouache. And then these are scanned and become material for me. So that's that idea of painting by hand is important to me. Like that's as sort of deeply connected as I can be to an observation, where it becomes a really strong developed memory of this thing and a material to digitally manipulate. So essentially I then digitally paint with a painting. So then after these are scanned, they're brought into Photoshop and manipulated. And then once the digital composition is done, then they're churned into ceramic decals. So we have a decal printer at school, so the toner has been changed to a ceramic-based medium, which then transfers over to the surface of the piece and is fired on and fused to the surface.